Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. We have this webinar today on emergency communications challenges and opportunities in the Digital Networks Act. I think it's now time for starting. So first, we will start with a few practicalities. So first of all, if you would like to activate the captions, you have this possibility. So there are the automatically translated captions, and you can see on the screen where you can find them. I leave you. It's very easy, so I don't think you will have any difficulties. And there will be a time for questions and hopefully answers. So you will be able to do it through the Q&A button, and you can see also on the screen where it is in our Zoom meeting. I also want to say that this webinar will be recorded. So you can, so in case you have you don't have understand any something, or you have forgotten some slide, you will be able to come back to it. And then, of course, we will be available for Q&A after the webinar by email. You can contact us. So I think we can then go to the first presentation. So it will be myself presenting. Then we will have Peter presenting the other part. So let's hope everything goes well and I can share my screen. It's always a stress. So let's hope that you can see it. So the first topic of today's emergency communications over LTE and IMS, the unresolved challenges. We at EENA, we had many inputs from different stakeholders saying that they were seeing risks on the migration over LTE and problems. And we published a document summarizing and putting together all the information that we have received. So basically, as emergency calls are moving to LTE and IP-based systems and what it's called also packet switched emergency communications, there are some benefits, of course, that these new technologies bring, but we have seen that there are also some risks, and some of them are quite serious. And what we seen also that this can be minimized. First of all, doing end-to-end testing between all the stakeholders. So that means the devices, the telecommunication networks, and of course the PSAPs. And the goal is at least ensure that 112 remains reliable as it was in the legacy systems. And this has to be ensured before these legacy systems are retired. And if possible, as we are evolving to resolve some issues that they were already there in the legacy systems, but the opportunity is there to resolve these issues. So what I want to say here is that it's not an excuse to say, okay, this was already like this in the legacy system. So when we make the evolution to a better technology, it's also an opportunity to resolve some of these issues. So these are the four main key risks that we have seen. I will go into the details on these four. The first one is the voice over LTE roaming incompatibility. Then we have also seen some problems with the callback. Um, this can be because of the devices or because of the network. We have also seen in, and these are more on the lab testing that were performed on the next generation 112 routing, and also on how SMS to 112 are implemented in LTE. So the first point is the voice over LTE roaming incompatibility. So we have seen, and with this topic that we have been already aware some years ago already, and this it's that the when somebody is roaming, so it's traveling abroad, there's no always a good roaming coordination between mobile network operators, and the person who is roaming in some cases cannot do any calls, and even cannot reach 112. Now, as we have still in the 2G and 3G fallback, these calls usually go through these type of networks, but when these 2G and 3G will shut down, there will be no fallback, and therefore these travelers may not reach 112. And of course, to solve this, there's a requirement of having very good agreements of roaming, and seeing and again testing if everything is working well. Then on the callback. So the first there are many topics here. The first one is that now the caller ID is only in one field, that it's the PAI, and this is something that the PSAPs in some cases cannot read. So this is a step to be done by the PSAPs to be aware of it, and know that they should have access to this field. Then on roaming, and well, this we have already covered the incompatibility, but there's also a problem about when, even if this there's the possibility of calling 112, that these calls are anonymous, are handled as anonymous emergency calls. And this, what happens is that the PSAP doesn't receive the caller ID number, and they cannot call back. And callback is a very important feature for emergency services in case they have to contact again the person in an emergency situation. And this is also, when I'm speaking about roaming, it's also a case in a limited service state. But this can also happen. The AMS calls are blocked, and of course, there's no AML over SMS. This happens also today, but I just wanted to emphasize that we need to take the opportunity to solve some of the issues that we had with the legacy systems, and that we can try to solve with this new generation of networks. Then these callback failures, this is more on, of course, when we are speaking about non-smartphones, that we have seen that there are some problems from users, that they may block the short numbers callbacks, and also that the 112 as caller ID is rejected. And this is really something that it's on the device's side. On the risk three is what has been discovered during the black test events that have been done together with ETSI. That in the lab it has been seen that the IMS it replaces the emergency URN with a generic SIP URI. So this means that if there's a NG112 framework with an SINet, this URN doesn't arrive to the SINet, and this means that the SINet cannot perform the function-based routing, because the SINet will not know if the URN has been eCall, police, fire, ambulance, for example, or others. And this is important for NG call, for and for all the 112 calls in the future. Otherwise, the performance of the SINets are are not 100%, because one of their features is to have a more enhanced routing, and if the URN is not getting there, this advanced routing will not function. And this is really something that it has to be configured in the mobile by the mobile network operators, and that this is the URN is kept, and the inside the SIP header. And the last one is, of course, the SMS to 112. It has been there's the main use of SMS to 112 is on one side with for AML, the evolution of getting the location of the caller in the SIP header will of course evolve, but until this is not done, AML will still be the reliable source of caller location. And there's many countries where still the SMS is used to contact 112 for people with disabilities, and also for users that cannot speak due to the emergency situation. And RTT is being deployed, but until then SMS to 112 needs to function. So here are our recommendations. So first of all, the need of really performing integrated live testings, and this has to be, all the stakeholders need to be involved here. So the devices, the telecommunications networks, and the PSAPs is the responsibility of all the stakeholders to ensure that this works correctly. The callback and the roaming compatibility, it's something that needs to be ensured, and this is together with the URN problem, something that the mobile network operator needs to work on. The SMS and AML functionality needs to be reliable until other technologies are fully deployed. And this is that a general recommendation that the legacy systems should be retired until the reliability of the emergency communications are really improved. And that's it on my side. I think now it's time for questions. I will have to leave right after my presentation. So if you have questions, please ask them now or by email. It can also be a possibility after the webinar. I don't see any questions, so I will thank you for your attention, and I will handle the floor to my colleague Peter.
Perfect. Thanks, Christina. I might just share my screen now. 1 second, guys. Perfect. Hopefully you can see this now. Almost there. Right, guys, spoiler alert here, just ignore all that. So I hope you can all hear me. If you can't, someone shout out. My name is Peter Largan. I'm a senior policy officer at EENA, and today I'll be giving a quick overview of a new piece of legislation that's about to come out for emergency communications, which is the Digital Networks Act.
Peter, we can't see your presentation.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, 1 second. That's unusual. Right, give me a second. Can you see it now?
Yeah, now we can see.
All right, perfect. Okay, so start again. Take two. So, in this presentation, I'm just going to give an overview of what the Digital Networks Act is. Firstly, the general kind of context politically for the Digital Networks Act in Brussels, and also more specifically, of course, for emergency communications. And then I'll go through kind of what we've identified as our key asks for the regulation. At the end, I'll also discuss, as an added bonus, this new measure called the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, which was proposed by the European Commission during the summer. But the main priority will be the Digital Networks Act. So what is the Digital Networks Act? The Digital Networks Act, or DNA, is an upcoming EU law that will replace the current law in the EU on emergency communications, which is the European Electronic Communications Code. It's expected to be published on the 16th of December 2025, so in about 4 months. After this, the next step, it will be that the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union, which represents member states' governments, will negotiate over the text to reach an agreement on the DNA, and then the law itself will likely enter into force around 2028. So as I said, it hasn't been published yet, but during the summer, the European Commission held a call for evidence. It's just a consultation, which closed on the 11th of July, which lots of people responded to. And they also held a consultation last year. And over the past few months, we've also been discussing the future of 112, the Digital Networks Act, with the European Commission. So how does our area of 112 emergency communications and public warning fit into the DNA? So the DNA is definitely an opportunity to build on the EECC, the current law for emergency communications in Europe, and create better new EU rules for emergency communications. But it's important to note that it's not the main aspect of the DNA. The Digital Networks Act actually sets rules for all types of electronic communications networks in Europe. And indeed, emergency communications is actually quite a small part of that. As a result, so far, during discussions on the DNA in Europe, emergency communications hasn't been mentioned so much. We're definitely a secondary issue. And in addition, most of the focus on the DNA has actually been about simplification. I'm not sure if this has been discussed as much outside of Brussels, but right now we're in what's called a competitiveness crisis or simplification bonanza, which is basically where there's a claim that there's too many rules for businesses in Europe, and that the solution is to take away rules so that businesses can be more, free to do what they want. So indeed in the DNA, a lot of the focus has been on simplification, although resilience has been also a secondary but important issue. So the big question we had at the start of this year, will the Digital Networks Act look at emergency communications, which are governed by 109 and 110 EECC, as an opportunity to cut rules and simplify, or will they see it as a way to actually improve the resilience of Europe? So we got a partial answer at our conference in 2025, when the Commission's Executive Vice President, Henry Verkunen, who is in charge of all things technological in Brussels, provided some remarks on what she saw as the future of emergency communications in the Digital Networks Act. Just to give a couple of key points, she confirmed that for emergency communications, improving public safety as well as competitiveness would be central to the European Commission's approach in the Digital Networks Act. And in particular, she kind of mentioned three key aspects of emergency communications that she supported. The first is public warning, which she said was pivotal to strengthening resilience and safety. The second, of course, was legacy eCall. I know we're all familiar with issues around eCall and the 2G, 3G shutdown. So she said that vehicles currently equipped with legacy eCall will have to move to packet switch, so 4G, 5G solutions. And then she also mentioned that direct-to-device satellite communications could complement coverage for access to 112 in underserved areas. And she concluded that for emergency communications, the safety of EU citizens was non-negotiable. So very good news on our side. So with that in mind, I think we see the Digital Networks Act as an opportunity to improve emergency communications. We think the risk of simplification coming for the sector and reducing protections for people in emergencies is very unlikely. And we have 5 kind of key asks then for what we want the Digital Networks Act to improve in emergency communications. And of course, if you have any other ideas that you think we should support, please tell us. You can email me or ask a question during this webinar. So as I said, there's 5 areas. The first is to making the existing rules in Article 109 and 110 EECC a bit more efficient and effective. The second is protecting 112 during the 2G, 3G shutdown. The third is crisis-proofing emergency communications. The fourth is future-proofing public safety. And the last one is improving the implementation of EU law, which I'm sure many of you will be aware that the implementation of public warning, co-location, etc., has been quite delayed across Europe. So for the first, which is making the existing obligations a bit more efficient and effective, we've kind of identified 3, I won't say issues, but 3 areas of improvement in core location, public warning, and real-time text. So to start with calling location, one thing we'd like the Digital Networks Act to do is to clarify the rules on core location criteria. As many of you know, currently member states are responsible for developing their own criteria on core location. And that's resulted in significant divergences in the criteria across member states, which BEREC, the body of European regulators, has found to be insufficient. And this has made it very difficult to actually understand, how co-location is performing across different countries and compare it. And indeed, we saw during our survey during the summer, which some of you may have answered, that about 90% of respondents wanted better guidance from the European Commission on core location. So to resolve that, we'd like the Commission, instead of member states, to set core location criteria. The second thing we'd like to bring in is to make altitude or Z axis information mandatory for handset-derived core location. And this has been obligatory in the US for some time, and it's available in some countries in Europe. And it could be quite useful in situations where a caller perhaps is in mountains or more likely in high-rise buildings. And it's also quite easy to implement, although in order for it to be effective, PSATs would likely need to invest in information on building floor plans, so you can identify, okay, this person is at, say, 50 meters altitude, it must be around the 6th floor of that building. And then the last big ask we have for co-location is that it should be updated throughout the calls. We've become aware that in some countries, only the initial core location is used by emergency services, or perhaps only the stage 1 PSAT receives core location. That can cause problems. For example, if someone is moving to a hospital, perhaps you're driving to the hospital to save time while the ambulance comes to meet you, initial core location can become quickly less useful. And once again, this is something that's quite easy to implement because most countries already have handset-derived core location. So the next area that we've kind of identified some improvements might be needed in is in real-time text and total conversation. These are good technologies, and the problem is that it seems that some PSAPs lack the equipment to properly process them. So for example, with real-time text, from what I've heard, one potential issue could be that if the stage 1 PSAP receives a real-time text conversation, they might not be able to actually transfer the conversation onto a stage 2. They might need to actually relay the conversation with the stage 2 or with anyone else who's trying to help. Which, if there aren't too many real-time texts, might not be a problem in theory, but in practice, that could, in a crisis where there's a lot of demand for emergency services, cause a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of problems. One way to resolve this would be to make sure PSAPs can process these new types of conversations in an equivalent manner to other emergency communications, such as by incorporating an EENA into your PSAP. And another issue which we've also become aware of, which I suppose is kind of going back to what Christine discussed, is that we have to make sure that these new technologies work well over 4G and 5G, and specifically for real-time text, that it works well with roaming. So we'd like more testing to be done on that, although perhaps that won't be in the Digital Networks Act because it's a bit specific. The final area that we'd like to improve is public warning. So I think it's clear that public warning was a really big win in the European Electronic Communications Code, but some issues in its use have become clear, with probably the most well-known example being the Spanish floods in 2024, where it's being claimed that a lack of clear procedures and a lack of knowledge on how those procedures worked led to lengthy delays in activating public warnings, which may have resulted in a higher death toll. We also saw that the NIST report, which was this big EU report last year by a former Finnish prime minister or president, on basically what we needed to do to improve preparedness in Europe. We saw that report identified several criteria that they believed effective public warning systems should have, such as multi-channel public warnings, geo-targeting, clear and brief messages, accessibility, etc. But this hasn't actually been implemented into EU law. And lastly, we know that most EU citizens want the EU to play a more active role in providing information and guidance to citizens during major crises. So with all that in mind, what we'd like the DNA to do is to firstly include the characteristics of effective public warning identified in the NIST report. Secondly, for member states to provide annual reports on the preparation and readiness of their public warning systems. And thirdly, in general, for the DNA to improve or to require member states to improve their procedures for activating public warning, so they're ready to work in a crisis. So that's the first kind of big area of asks that we have for the DNA. The second is protecting 112 during the 2G, 3G shutdown. So I don't think I need to tell you guys about this, of course, but the 2G, 3G shutdown has resulted in some issues for 112. Christina already mentioned most of the issues that might happen over IMS. And of course, things like eCall, which are currently 2G, 3G reliant, they might soon lose functionality. The proposal that we have to prevent this from happening in future, because by the time the DNA comes in, it'll be in 2028, so it might be a bit too late for the 2G, 3G shutdown, is for a new obligation in the Digital Networks Act to oblige PSAPs and mobile network operators to provide roadmaps before any future significant change in the networks used to provide access to emergency services. And those roadmaps should include all the necessary steps that need to be taken before this change to ensure that this change in networks doesn't result in an interruption or a degradation in quality in access to 112. And indeed, it's probably too late for the 2G, 3G shutdown, but for the 4G shutdown, the 5G shutdown into the future, this could be quite beneficial. We also want to make sure that, well, Christina's already discussed this, so I won't discuss it in too much detail. We want to make sure that specific issues like, for example, a lack of callback and co-location while roaming are protected in the DNA, perhaps by explicitly including a right to callback in the DNA and an explicit call for co-location to work while roaming. Excuse me. Then the third area of focus first is crisis-proofing emergency communications, which is something that I think in 2025 has become a bit more important due to, for example, the blackouts in Iberia in April, and of course Storm Éowyn in Ireland in January, where a lot of people were left without access to electronic communications and as a result, access to 112. So the first potentially way that could be done is by using emergency satellite communications and specifically direct-to-device communications to boost resilience. As some of you will know, direct-to-device satellite communications are being rolled out in quite a few countries in 2025. Initially to provide SMS services, but more recently now to also provide access to certain apps like WhatsApp and emergency apps in some countries. We did a report in it earlier this year. We found that direct-to-device satellite communications could improve access to 112 in remote areas. But perhaps more importantly, it could also provide fallback connectivity following a ground network failure. But that being said, in order for the technology to really add value, instead of just having a theoretical use case, we also found that this technology needs to be implemented in a manner that meets the user needs of both PSAPs and people in emergencies. So to resolve that, we want Article 109 EECC, which sets the rules for emergency communications, will of course now be replaced in the DNA, but we want this to explicitly include satellites, so that satellites have to make sure emergency calls are properly routed, are free of charge, come in call location, etc. And then also potentially future secondary legislation might be needed to overcome kind of satellite specific issues, such as routing, which of course can't be cell tower routed, and also some issues with core location as well, for example. And then the other way that we could potentially improve network resilience is also by using, by improving, for example, independent power generation capabilities in cell towers, which vary hugely across Europe, and perhaps by incorporating minimum criteria for network resilience, and specifically for network resilience following power failures into the DNA, and to ask for member states to report outages of 112 to the European Commission. So overall, in the area of resilience, the key asks are to consider things like satellites, to consider better reporting and minimum criteria for resilience, and also to potentially have things like independent power generations in cell towers. And then the last big area of our ask is what we're calling future-proofing public safety. So firstly, similarly to real-time text, we want to make sure that new types of emergency communications, such as real-time text, satellite communications, internationally routed emergency communications, can be processed properly by emergency services. I already discussed why it might be an issue if that's not the case. For now, if you only receive the occasional satellite call, the occasional real-time text, it's probably okay if they can't be read in the same manner. But if we start, well, it's maybe not, it's okay, but it's probably acceptable. But if we start receiving larger numbers of these types of communications in the future, we need to be able to make sure that PSAPs can properly process and transfer these calls. So to do that, we'd like an obligation for PSAPs to be able to process new types of communications in an equivalent manner to other emergency communications, which could potentially be by using an EENA. Secondly, to facilitate international emergency calls, I won't go through all the details here. The long story short is that we'd like each country to be obliged to identify a single entry point, or PSAP, that can receive emergency communications for which a most appropriate PSAP cannot be immediately identified. So in other words, if also with things like satellites, etc., but more importantly for international emergency calls, if a PSAP in, say, Belgium gets a call saying someone's relative in Romania needs help, and let's just imagine for a second that that Romania wasn't on the PSAP directory, or didn't have a designated most appropriate PSAP that the Belgians were aware of. Well, this would ensure that every country would now have a single entry point, so that there's always somewhere where an emergency call can be sent to, even if it's not possible to identify the most appropriate PSAP. And then lastly, for number-independent interpersonal communication services, we don't necessarily have a position on whether emergency communications should be expanded to include number-independent interpersonal communication services. But if they are, then we want to make sure that member states, once again, have a single entry point which can receive these communications. So there are kind of our four main asks for the DNA. We do have a fifth one, which I don't have a slide on, which is improving implementation, but it's sort of hard to do that in an act. It's at the end of the day, implementation is a matter of the rule of law. It's a matter of whether or not member states actually comply with the laws they're supposed to follow. And you can't exactly include something in an act saying, but member states have to follow the law, but they already have to follow it. So our next steps for the DNA is to continue advocacy on it in the coming months. It'll be proposed in December, as I said. So for now, we're working a lot with the Commission. We've also met with some MEPs. And then after it's proposed in December, we'll also start working more with the European Parliament and the Council. We'll also discuss it during our December event on future EU laws for emergency communications, and of course, it'll be in 2026. And another thing which, sorry, I'll mention as well, actually, is we have another new piece of legislation coming up, which we'll also be working on over the next few months in parallel, which is the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. I don't know if you guys know that much about the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. It was proposed in July by the European Commission. So already a Union Civil Protection Mechanism exists, but this new UCPM, as it's called, will improve it, specifically by increasing the disaster fund to 10 billion to help member states which face disasters and whatnot. And it will also have a stronger review system to ensure that member states can meet this new common baseline for disaster resilience, which will be set by member states in the Commission, and new rules to facilitate the use of Galileo early warning satellite service. So in all, we see this as a really positive measure because indeed it's going to improve the funds available for disaster response, because it's going to help member states implement the Galileo public warning system, and because it's going to have a strong review system. But we've noticed some small issues with it, which we started working with member states and with the European Parliament to try to improve. These are things, for example, like a lack of clear rules for improving public warning. The UCPM says, for example, that the Commission should support member states in public warning, but it doesn't say how. And a 5-year review period or implementation period between each review of member states' disaster resilience, which I think is a bit too long. So for that regulation, our key asks are that firstly, public warning should be explicitly included in this new review mechanism and common baselines for disaster resiliences. Secondly, that the NISTO criteria for effective public warning systems should be included in the UCPM, assuming that it's not included in the Digital Networks Act. Thirdly, that member states should have to share public warnings with other member states if they believe that the disaster in question might have cross-border effects. And fourthly, that the time period between disaster resilience reviews should be shortened from once every 5 years to once every 18 months. So that's pretty much all I have to say. If you want to learn more, we have our event in December on the future of EU laws for emergency communications. We'll be discussing the Digital Networks Act, the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, and other issues such as co-location, accessibility, and much, much more. And you can find more information on our website. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I don't think there's live streams for December. I just saw the question there. No other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Peter. For the question from Jan, I can answer that no live stream for December, but if you are interested in more of our webinars, you can see all on our website. There's a few now announced and more will be announced on time. I will send the link in the chat as well, so you can see there if you want to attend any of our webinars. And I would also encourage everyone to join our newsletter because all our webinars will be announced there. Thank you, Peter, much for speaking, and Christina also, who had to leave already. And if there are no more questions, then thank you all for participating. And again, please do check our upcoming webinars and also the event on EU law if you want to learn more about these things. All right, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the day.